Single dad cried at his wife's grave. Then a female cop left flowers and changed everything. The day broke open with a soundless crack inside his chest as the soil under his knees pressed cold and damp through his jeans, and the headstone bearing his wife's name blurred until the letters melted into tears. He had promised himself he would be strong today, promised his little girl he would not cry, promised the quiet air of the cemetery that he would stand tall. But grief has a way of finding the softest place to sit, and there, in the gray morning light, a single father finally let it take him. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet ways strangers can change everything, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Grandma Dearie. Stories like this live because hearts like yours keep them alive. He had been a husband before he was a single dad, and he still carried that identity like a coat he could not bring himself to hang up. Since the accident, every day felt borrowed, stitched together by routines that barely held. Breakfasts were made on autopilot, lunches packed with trembling hands, bedtime stories read with a voice that cracked at the happy parts. His daughter, small and brave in a pale blue coat, stood beside him now, her fingers curled into his sleeve, her eyes too old for her age as she watched him crumble. He hated that she had to see this, hated that grief had turned him into a man who knelt in public places, but he also knew that hiding it had only made the nights longer. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant hum of a road and the whisper of wind through bare branches. Rows of stones stood like patient witnesses to private wars, and his wife's grave felt like the center of them all. He brushed damp leaves away with shaking hands, tracing the dates as if they could explain the space between them. The world had not paused when she left, bills still came, the house still needed repairs, and his daughter still needed a parent who could show up. He showed up, yes, but always with an ache that refused to dull. It was then that a police car rolled slowly along the gravel path, its presence gentle rather than sharp. He barely noticed at first. Authority had become background noise in his life since paperwork and reports followed the accident, since forms asked him to summarize the worst day he had ever lived. But this time, the car stopped. A female officer stepped out, her uniform crisp against the soft green of the grounds, her movements careful, as if she understood the sanctity of the moment without being told. She did not rush toward him or clear her throat for attention. She knelt instead at the headstone, setting down a small bouquet of white flowers with a tenderness that seemed to quiet the air. The gesture was simple, almost ordinary, yet it landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples through a grief that had felt stuck for months. His daughter watched closely, curiosity and confusion mingling on her face, and he felt something loosen inside him as he realized this was not an official duty. This was human. The officer stayed only a minute, her head bowed, her hands folded. In that silence, he felt seen in a way he had not felt since the funeral. Not pitted, not processed, just acknowledged. When she stood, she glanced at him with eyes that carried understanding without intrusion, and then she returned to her car and drove away, leaving the flowers glowing softly against the stone. The change did not come all at once. It never does. But as the minutes passed, his sobs eased into something steadier, and his breathing found a rhythm again. His daughter leaned into him, and he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, realizing how long it had been since he had allowed comfort to exist without guilt. The officer's flowers felt like permission, a quiet reminder that the world still held room for gentleness, even here. In the weeks that followed, that small moment began to echo through his days. He started noticing kindness where he had been blind to it before, a neighbor who shoveled his driveway without asking, a teacher who slipped an extra note into his daughter's backpack, a cashier who smiled as if she meant it. Grief still sat with him, but it no longer commanded the room. He found himself taking his daughter to the park again, pushing her on the swings while the sun caught in her hair, laughing at her insistence on going higher. He cooked meals that were not just edible but warm, and he learned that showing up did not always mean being unbreakable. One afternoon, as he returned to the cemetery with his daughter, they brought flowers of their own. He noticed the officer's white roses had been replaced by fresh ones, someone else's quiet act layered over the first. The place felt less like a wound and more like a bridge. He knelt again, but this time he did not fall apart. He told his daughter stories about her mother, about the way she laughed with her whole body and believed fiercely in helping strangers. His daughter listened, eyes shining, as if storing these stories like treasures. The memory of the officer stayed with him not as a face but as a feeling, a reminder that goodness does not always announce itself. Sometimes it parks nearby, steps softly into your pain, leaves something beautiful, and trusts you to carry the rest. He began volunteering at his daughter's school, then at a local support group, not because he had all the answers, but because he understood what it meant to need someone to kneel beside you without asking anything in return. As the seasons turned, he realized that the day at the grave had not changed his past, but it had reshaped his future. It taught him that strength could look like tears and that healing could arrive in uniform or in plain clothes, carried by hands that simply cared. His daughter grew lighter, her laughter returning in bursts that filled the house, and he learned to smile without apology. If this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you of a moment when kindness found you at your lowest, please engage with this video. Your likes, shares, and subscriptions help stories like this reach the people who need them most. And before we end, leave a comment telling us about a small act of kindness that changed your life, because your story might be the light someone else is waiting for. On that first day, a single dad cried at his wife's grave, believing the world had taken more than it would ever give back. But a few white flowers, placed by a stranger who understood the weight of loss, proved that even in the quietest places, love can still find a way to change everything.